Rempel. I am the acting chair of the MCC Ontario board. Based on your decision, I will, I assume, become the actual chair of the MCC Ontario board. And I want to welcome you here to our annual general meeting. And I am going to begin by reading Luke 4 verse 18 to remind us of the mission of and the purpose of MCC Ontario as we go into this meeting. And the book of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him, and he opened the book and found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set free those who are downtrodden, and to proclaim the favorable year of the Lord." This is one of the verses that is part of the mission that forms the undergirding of the mission of MCC. MCC shares God's love and compassion for all in the name of Christ by responding to basic human needs and working for peace and justice. So with that purpose in mind, let's pause and open this meeting in prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you that you have given us this purpose, that you have reminded us of the importance of sharing the good news with those who have need. We ask that you will guide our meeting today, guide our thoughts and our decisions as we address the activities of MCC Ontario, as we oversee the activities of MCC Ontario. Thank you for each person who has come to this meeting, and bless us in our activities in this next hour. Amen.
Well, good evening. Good evening. I'm Keith Regier, the acting secretary of the board, inspired by the same reason that Lynn became the acting chair. So a couple things I want to do. One is to first of all indicate eligibility for voting. So the bylaws state that at each meeting of the members, every person who is a congregational representative, a duly authorized delegate actually in attendance, or a member of the board of directors shall be entitled to vote. So if you're one of those people, you can vote. The first task is to review the minutes of the last annual general meeting and to approve them. So the minutes are in the board package. Let me just say a couple of things about them, just to highlight what we did, which is mostly what we usually do with these kinds of meetings. So we, John Head, reviewed the strategic goals of MCC Ontario and reported on their status and our status in meeting those goals. The secretary last year, Dave Thiessen, presented the minutes, which were accepted. Anita Dong presented the audit and finance report, including the audited financial statements, which were accepted. Lynn Rempel presented the slate of candidates for the board, which was accepted. And then the meeting was closed with a farewell to Karen Cornies, who's been on the board for 14 years, 6 of those as chair, which was a significant period of service. So what we need to do then is to approve the minutes of that meeting. And so there is a motion that the minutes of the September 24, 2018 MCC Ontario annual general meeting be accepted as a record of that meeting. So I am moving that, and I think we need somebody to second that. We'll say Tricia. Any discussion? All in favor? Wave your hands. Okay, thank you very much. One other, I was going to say minor piece of business. It's not actually minor. The board has been working at a revision of the bylaw number 1 of MCC Ontario, and we had hoped to have it at this meeting, but things happen, and so they're not here. So we will be bringing, hopefully, a revision to the bylaws to the next annual general meeting for approval. So thank you very much.
Okay, good evening, everybody. My name is Luke Yancey. I'm the chair of the Audit and Finance Committee and treasurer of the board. And unqualified. I'm not acting like the rest of the officers here. So, in terms of the picture for the finances, big picture, our revenues were down a little bit from the year before, and people may ask, well, what's going on there? I think it's fair to say, and we can give more details if people have specific questions, but that is not representative of a significant trend. We won't expect that revenues will again be down 2 million the following year. It's to do with a number of kind of one-time or offset revenue items. And proof of that, we've just looked at our Q1 statements for the current year, and revenue is up again across the board. So we're not particularly concerned about that, even though the numbers do look fairly significant there. On the expense side, pretty similar to the previous year, and forwardings, again, related to those revenue issues, we're down some. Again, that's not something where we would expect that to be a significant trend going forward. Into the next slide, we always like to give you a bit of an idea of where the revenue comes from. And I always just highlight the diversity of our revenue sources here. We do have revenue coming in from general donations, but also from a number of other sources, so that we're a bit more flexible and a bit more resilient if we do get into a point where at any given time we're struggling on the specific donation side of things. On to the next slide. A look at the expense side of things. Again, you can see the vast majority of our expenses are in terms of funds forwarded directly to MCC Canada. That's to do the international work of MCC. But there then is also the programs area. That's the work of MCC here in Ontario. That's also a significant chunk of what we do. And then the two other smaller pieces are the admin and fundraising piece, an area that I know people are always monitoring fairly closely to make sure that we're using the dollars in an efficient way. Here, I like to point out that there is such a thing as too much or too little in terms of administration and fundraising expenses. If you're spending too much there, I think people understand that. That's clear enough. But if you're not spending any dollars there on your administration, if you're not spending anything raising dollars, soon those dollars dried up or they're not managed properly, and you end up with a less effective organization. So MCC as a whole has a commitment to keep those chunks at or under 20%. I did the math on this. We're at 15.9% here, if I've got it correctly. So we're doing okay there based on our overall commitment. And then a quick look at our reserve funds to see that they are relatively similar, fairly stable from year to year here. We've had some challenges in terms of how we are able to fund our operating reserve based on some of the commitments that we have and the agreements that we have in terms of revenue sharing with the wider system. Those conversations are ongoing, and hopefully there will be some sort of a result to that in the next little while. So with that, I will make the motion that the audited financial statements for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2019 be accepted as presented. Somebody to second that. Okay, thank you. And any other discussion, any questions on the financial statements? Okay, hearing none, I guess we calling, yeah.
All those in favor, please raise your hand. And thank you. And those opposed, same sign. And that is carried.
And then we have one more motion in terms of an AGM piece of business, and that is to motion for the approval of the firm of Cardy, Winters and Simon LLP to be our auditor for MCC Ontario for the 2019-20 year at a fee to be determined by the board. So I'll make that motion, and anybody to second that? Scott. And then open it up for any discussion, any questions on that motion?
And all in favor, please raise your hands. Thank you. Those opposed, same sign. And that is carried. Thank you very much, Luke. And now Kathleen Ledley with our nominating committee report.
The nominating committee has been working hard over this past year, and we've had a recent meeting. We try in our committee meetings to identify people who would make good board members and approach them and see if they would have an interest. If they do, we send more information, possibly meet with them, and then encourage them if they do say yes. We do have an orientation for them, which we had just before our board meeting at 3:30 this afternoon. We had the orientation, and we look to have people on different committees that bring motions to our board, and we either accept them or not. And today I have the pleasure of welcoming our newest board member, Irene Gibbons. She is with us by Zoom, as she's up north working at the denominational camp. And so we're pleased to have her, and her bio is in with the package, and so you can learn a little bit more about her. She's a very gifted woman, so she'll make a good addition to our board. We have the names of our board members. Pick names, all right, that you can see people who have served over the last few years and are continuing to serve. We had a big turnover last year, and so a lot of new board members within the year, and then of course a new board member this year. So I would like to, are you going to get something? All right. Oh, okay. Well, then you're forgiven. Motion 4 is, I move that the proposed slate of nominees be elected to the MCCO Ontario Board of Directors for 2019-20. Would someone like to move that we accept this? Second the motion. Yes. And now we have to ask if there are any questions. I knew you wouldn't have to do that.
Right, so all those in favor of accepting this slate of directors on the MCC Ontario Board, please raise your hands. Thank you. And opposed, same sign. That is carried. Thank you very much. And I will also note that we have two outgoing board members. Kathleen is going to be leaving. She has the need to resign early, and Luke is leaving us after 7 years and 6 years as board chair. So we want to thank you very much, Luke, for your service on the board.
My name is John Head, and I'm the Executive Director of MCC Ontario, and it's a pleasure to come to you with some very key items to report on in terms of year 4 of our 5-year strategic plan. And then looking ahead, I'll talk a bit about the strategic directions that the MCCs nationally have decided to follow. So if you have your packet, right to the mic, okay. If you have the packet, it doesn't have page numbers on them. Where I'm going to start is where it says 2015-2020 Strategic Plan Dashboard. And it's right after the slate and the new director. You can find that. And this is a report that our board receives, what follows is a report that our board receives on this plan. So what you see in front of you is the strategic directions in the current strategic plan that we're in, and then the strategic goals, which are a level down in terms of our objectives and directions we're going. So with that as the background information, what the board gets every year and what we report to you at our AGM every year is what follows that. The next page, we use indicator lights that take some of those strategic directions and evaluates whether we're on target with where we hope to be in the strategic plan. So if that's the case, there would be a green light. If there's some degree of uncertainty of whether we'll make the 5-year target, there's a yellow light. And if there happens to be something where absolutely we're way off target, there'd be a red light. So I'm not going to dive into all of those, but if you see on this page, there's several areas where there's yellow lights. And then there's pages that follow that which explain that particular area in terms of more specific metrics, and then a statement at the bottom of that page if there's a yellow light in terms of why we're not on target to reach that. So as an example, I'm going to go into the first two, because you see at the top that the first two, strategic projects and peace building, we have yellow lights on the right-hand column. So that would indicate some degree of concern that we're not going to reach the targets. So if you flip a couple of pages ahead, there's a learning and analysis section which I'll encourage you to read because that provides some background. But then there's a page for the strategic priorities and then a page for peace building. It gives some narrative about what we're doing in those areas, and then specifically at the bottom of each of those 2 pages, for example, peace building, the amber light, indicates some explanation why we don't feel we're on target to meet that objective by the end of the 5 years. And both number 1 and number 2, partnerships and peace building, it's not that we don't feel like we're doing vital work in those areas. We're finding that with this current strategic plan, where we set some of these targets 4 years ago in this 5-year plan, that the way we're measuring those don't really reveal a great deal about the effectiveness of what we're doing. So the way we're measuring, for example, under strategic projects, the measurement is the number of projects, but it doesn't indicate at a greater level the effectiveness of that work. It's rather just the numeric count. So there might be a strategic project that has a number of volunteers or a number of churches, and it's doing very effective work, but the partnership itself might be just counted as one. So we found that particular measurement is not real meaningful. So that's why you'll find in the pages that follow some explanation of what we're doing, some numbers, some stories, and then just a brief explanation at the bottom of the page of why we're identifying that as an amber light. So similarly, if you flip ahead, the next area of yellow light is under human capital. I don't have page numbers to reference the whole document, but human capital is another area where there's a yellow light. And the aspect of that particular strategic goal that is concerning, that we're not going to reach the target, has to do with the number of international service workers that we anticipated having at the end of the 5-year period of time. And as you look at that, there's a graph there which I'll try to pull up here just so you can tie it into the package you're looking for. So as you look at the graph on the left-hand side, you can see that the yellow line, which measures international service workers, it's dipped considerably. And at the end of our 5-year goal, the strategic goal was to be much higher than that. So that's one area of concern under human capital, is we're not seeing people that are desirous to serve in our international assignments. We do a great deal of recruiting for that. We respond to applicants, and we are responsible for doing the recruiting for those that might be interested in this province. And we meet with them, we answer questions, but we're finding that's a real challenge for a variety of reasons. I could cite a few of those. In some cases, it's maybe young adults that would be in a position to serve in that capacity, but they're coming out of the university with college debt. Just a number of factors that are affecting that number. So that's, in terms of human capital, that's the only concern we have, but it's a serious one. And we're working on that regularly in terms of how can we recruit more effectively, how can we identify whether the programs that they're taking part in are just not addressing the needs that would result in more interest. So in terms of human capital, that's an amber light because we're not going to reach that target. Then the last area that I'll comment on from the dashboard report is donors and donations. And that's entitled number 5 in your report. And you can see some numbers related to that in terms of where we've come measuring donations to general. This is where kind of the where most needed category, which a lot of our donors contribute to. And you can see the actual results over a period of years. And generally, we're moving in a very good direction. You know, you can see in the later years some dips in that, and that might be a result of just one major donation that went possibly to a designated area, might be an international designated gift rather than general. So as you look at that particular area, we're not going to meet the target for at the end of 5 years, but if you read the narrative, I think you'll find that there's a lot of efforts that are undertaken that are not measured by this particular metric. So I encourage you to read through that on that particular section. So all the other areas of the dashboard report have green lights. It indicates that we have either exceeded the 5-year target or we're on track to meet it. So it's not an area of concern. So what I'm doing is just highlighting those areas where we have concern. Any questions about our report in this year 4 of our strategic plan? Yeah, the question is, have we ever measured the number of people that may have been involved with our SALT program that continue on either immediately or later as an international service worker? Michelle, I ask you to comment on that, and I'll repeat it just so the audience. And I'll repeat Michelle's answer. She indicated that MCC Canada and U.S. measure that, and it is something that is tracked. Any other questions about our dashboard report for our fiscal year that most recently ended?
tackling young people coming out of school with debt. Is there any possibility that you could work towards those agencies that provide the student loans to get a period of relief while they're doing service work in projects like organizations like MCC and holding back on interest on those loans, if that's a factor holding people back? I think if they were to receive a letter, it might be a possibility of introducing a concept like that.
Yeah, the question, you should have heard it because it was mic'd. And Michelle, I'm going to invite you to respond to that in terms of things we're doing with our International Service Worker Program related to student debt.
So that's probably a little trickier because the SALT program is administered by MCC Canada, and student debt would be often provincial, like here in Ontario it's OSAP. Perhaps maybe if it was a private kind of loan, but for students who receive OSAP, you'll know from the news that they have even less. They have no grace time now, so even the previous grace time that they used to have is gone. So legislatively speaking, it's kind of working against us in that way.
So giving OSAP an opportunity to participate in something good.
Okay, if there's no more questions, I'll move on to our 2020-25 strategic directions. And before I move on, I'll just comment on this particular slide. When it comes to risk management and IT standards, we don't have a quantitative measure, we just have a qualitative measure in terms of whether we're in full compliance with MCC-wide policies regarding this, and we are, so it's not a numeric. That's just a slide that indicates that we are in compliance. So the national boards in the U.S. and Canada have been working on strategic priorities for a new 5-year plan, which will start April 1st, 2020. And they're starting at a high level in terms of identifying strategic priorities that would apply essentially globally, things that we would collectively work on together. And through a number of board meetings and gaining input from partners and various boards and stakeholders, they have taken that information down and then passed a resolution in June at the joint national board meetings of identifying 4 strategic goals or strategic priorities for the upcoming 5-year period. And what you see there are those 4 goals. And as you read through those, they're probably not a surprise in terms of if you know what kind of work we do now. It's just following along those with giving a greater emphasis in certain areas. And those, as I mentioned, are very high level. And then what we are doing here in the province, we have a strategic planning committee that's made up of board members and staff. We're taking those high-level strategic priorities and then adding to them in terms of context that's specific to Ontario, or adding additional ones that are currently under discussion that aren't addressed necessarily by these strategic priorities, but are very relevant to our context here in Ontario. So because of these have been approved by the national boards and are being discussed in our board meeting tonight, I wanted you to be aware of those, and then you'll get further updates when we have completed our strategic plan for MCC Ontario. Oh, any questions on that? And this is what we'll report on for the next 5 years. This and then the detail that goes in addition to it. But before we have a closing prayer, I'm going to invite Kim Lester up. She is going to give us an overview of our centennial celebration activity, which is, we're just put months and months of planning into it, and it's just ramping up in terms of the public phase. So you'll hear lots more about it, but you're very early on getting a glimpse of lots of planning and effort, and we're excited about the success.
Thanks, John. So I'm Kim Lester, and I'm the Associate Executive Director here at MCC Ontario. And one of the main portfolios that I oversee is our fundraising efforts, which were talked about earlier, and it's a great privilege to do that. And we are very excited as we think about celebrating 100 years with MCC, which is the year in 2020. And what a beautiful celebration of the work that has been done in the name of Christ over the last 100 years. And I believe that every one of us involved in the organization now, we are standing on the shoulder of giants, of people who've gone before us and laid the foundation for the work that is happening now, which started in the 20s, as I'm sure most of you in this room know, out of what was happening in the former Soviet Union as people were starving and also fleeing. And a short time after MCC was formed, they were feeding, I have the numbers here, 25,000 people a day in 140 soup kitchens. And the work just continued on from there. And so in this next year, we are going to be doing a number of celebration events. And there's going to be regional events in each region, as well as one larger celebration event, which is actually happening, if you want to put in your calendar, October the 2nd in 2020. We, after 5 years of asking, got a yes from Malcolm Gladwell. So Malcolm will be our feature speaker at that event, and it will be focused on celebrating the centennial as well. In addition to a number of events that we're doing, we are also embarking on a centennial fundraising campaign. And I just want to note that this is the first time in our history that we have sort of collectively worked as provinces to share all our strategies and our methods and our campaign around raising money. So it's actually been really exciting for the organization. We've set an ambitious goal of $10 million to raise, and on the theme of helping uprooted people, which is how we started. We're going back to how we started, and we'll be raising money to help an additional 300,000 people in various projects in the world. I'm not sure if you know, the latest number is 70 million people in the world that are currently displaced because of war or conflict or famines. So we're going to be able to make an impact in that in the next few years. Our official public launch to the campaign is going to happen on November the 16th at our Peace Conference. So invite you back to our Peace Conference to enjoy that. But yeah, we are really excited as an organization to be able to celebrate this milestone together. Thank you.
Before we close, just any other questions about what you heard or didn't hear, what would like to hear? Just want to give you a moment to ask some questions that may not have been addressed. I guess we did a good job in informing you. We'll assume that. But questions may come to mind afterwards, so feel free to reach out to me or Lynn Rempels, our board chair. Any questions you have, we invite your feedback. We appreciate all the ways that you may have partnered with us, whether it's serving on the board, whether it's volunteering, whether it's being part of the congregation to support us in various ways. We couldn't exist without it, and we're very grateful for that. So feel free to reach out with questions that come to mind. And with that said, let me just close with that in prayer. Father, it's a privilege to be involved in this work. It's a privilege to work alongside donors and volunteers and churches and board members that all contribute their gifts and time and abilities and resources to make it happen. Thank you for this work we're called to. Thank you that we can reach out with compassion in the name of Christ and attempt to address the significant needs in our world that seem at times to worsen by the year. But yet it's your work, Lord, and we're thankful that you've provided resources for us to do it and leadership for 100 years, and we're excited for the years ahead. We're excited for the next strategic plan and all that may unfold as we continue to trust you to enable us and equip us to address these needs. We're humbled and grateful, and we just give you thanks and praise for what you've called us to do. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you very much for coming.